Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Believe in Yourself Heart and Mind podcast, where we're about to embark on an incredible journey with someone truly special. Join me in giving a very warm welcome to our one and only Chris. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Chris. This incredible individual is a true champion of the growth mindset and an absolute powerhouse in the world of education. From facing the struggles of a bustling classroom to becoming one of the most respected educational product designers, Chris's transformation is awe-inspiring. What sets Chris apart is his ingenious approach to problem solving. By leveraging interactive designs, rapid prototyping, and user research, he tackles the challenges head on, always putting the user's needs first. His collaborations with stakeholders and executives are legendary, turning ideas into solutions that enhance education and drive success. But Chris's impact extends beyond design. Through captivating articles, he inspires career changers, edtech enthusiasts, and aspiring product designers to reach for the stars. His words motivate and guide individuals on their unique paths to greatness. So, my friends, get ready for an unforgettable experience. Join me in extending the warmest of welcomes to the amazing Chris as we dive deep into the Believe in Yourself Heart and Mind podcast. Together, we'll discover the power within ourselves and unlock a world of endless possibilities. Let's do this. I'm super excited to have you. You're a very special guest in that you have the experience of transitioning to different careers. And I would love to dive deeper if you can just go ahead and tell us more about yourself, and then dive into a difficult experience that you faced early in your career and how you overcame it.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. As far as my background goes, originally I decided to study construction management, and mainly that's because at 18 I had no idea what I wanted to pursue. So I worked in the trades for several years, and then by the time graduation came around, I realized I wasn't really crazy about it. So that's when my first career switch happened. I went into corporate insurance, worked in that for 7 years. But after a while, I was burned out on that, and then I got a job at working as a middle school tech ed teacher, and that's when I started to discover UX design as a possible career. As far as the most difficult time that I came across early in my career, it would have to be my experience teaching. I kind of look at it as sort of my basic training for my career. And it was a weird scenario. I had no education experience. I had no, I had no education to teach. I was basically hired on because there was such a shortage of tech ed teachers. They were willing to hire industry professionals, and I figured, why not? Let's give it a shot. Not having a real good idea what I was walking into, but anyway, yeah. So it was a interesting time. I remember my first class came in, and that's when it really sank in. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm responsible for these 30 plus kids. I didn't know what I was doing. Um, so it was a lot of testing and iterating, seeing what worked, what didn't, what resonated with students and what didn't. And what helped me was, one, I had a very supportive administration, but I knew right off the bat, had to drop the ego. It was one of those things where either you drop it or the students strip it from you, sort of scenario. And then what they did at this school district was they would basically do reviews once per quarter for all new teachers. And I asked if we could do it more frequently. So I'd have about 3 or 4 people a quarter watching how I would present my lesson plans to students. How did it resonate? Classroom management tips. They give me feedback after the class, and I would take that and move forward. And that's what helped me get through the school year. So, and that's kind of what prepped me for my career into design.
Yeah, I'm gonna break it down just a little bit. I love what you said that you went through so many different positions, roles. Like literally, it's like you're changing your identity every single time that you're going to different career. Would you say that you you were really good at what you did before going to teaching, but you just didn't like enjoy it and you felt burnt out because of it, or people were just kind of telling you more what to do and you just weren't able to think for yourself? Like what happened?
Well, for construction, I just wasn't into it. I knew that as soon as I graduated. Insurance, I tried it for a while, and I mean, I like to think I was pretty decent at it. I had great reviews from my supervisors. It was just I was burned out because I mean, it was a customer service role. So, I 9 times out of 10, if I would get a phone call, someone was mad at me about something. They didn't think they got enough money. It just after a while, got burned out on it. And the other thing I noticed too is at least, working in insurance, you kind of hit a ceiling after a while where you're not really learning anything new. And so then you get bored.
Mm.
And it's just wasn't interesting. I was burned out. And that's what I love about design is there's always something new to learn. You never get bored.
Yeah. So segueing to teaching, you said that was a very hard career for you, but yet you're like, I'm gonna ask people to give me feedback, and not just that, I'm gonna do it 4 times more because I saw the opportunity in getting feedback. I saw what people are doing to improve. Why did you even go about doing that? And why was it more rewarding for you in this case, um, than other careers?
Teaching in general is just a difficult profession. And I had no idea until I got into it. I mean, you don't work a regular 8 hours. That's just the time you're in the classroom. You still got to prep the lesson plans. At the time, I didn't have a license. I was on an emergency permit. So on the weekends, I would go to a boot camp basically to learn how to teach. So I didn't have much of a social life, to say the least. Um, but it was one of those scenarios where it became painfully obvious in the first couple of weeks. It's like, I don't know how to teach these kids. I was like, I have to figure this out. And I had to be honest with myself. I was like, I need to ask for people who are smarter than me. Like, how can I deliver this? 'Cause you have to deliver the lessons in a way that's going to resonate with the kids. You don't want to just waste an entire year of education. So yeah, it was a real humbling experience.
Yeah, it sounds like you took responsibility when there were people around you, especially kids that you knew you had to be responsible for. And there was something about the challenge that really humbled you, like you were saying, versus like the other careers where you kind of figured things out and you're just like, oh, I can do this. You came from that maybe perspective, but then in teaching, you're like, I have no idea what to do, and I really need someone to help me. And also, the interesting piece is, um, you were going all in, and you had so many hours to going into to preparing for as a teacher, and you had this boot camp on the side. So imagine that, and yet you were feeling it was more rewarding. So I mean, like, isn't that to some people thinking, that doesn't sound right to me, but for some reason to Chris it does. Why do you think that is?
Honestly, I think it's because it was such an uncomfortable experience. Like there was no cruise control, but I think in those times when you're uncomfortable, it's something that you're not great at. That's where you like learn the most. That's where like those growth opportunities are. And that's when I started to kind of adapt from having more of like a fixed mindset like I did when I was working in insurance, like, oh, my way is the right way. If you don't like it, tough. Versus, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I have to figure out like how to do this effectively. And you ask for help, you do tons of research. I was always doing research just to figure out like what's an effective way to deliver this. Yeah, I mean, it's just one large growth opportunity. And I mean, looking back on it, like that was the biggest, that's one thing that I never regret going into teaching. That was the biggest learning experience of my life, but I'm glad I'm not in it anymore.
Yeah, you're like, no, that's I think a very shared feeling for a lot of people. So tell me how you transitioned to product design from your previous careers, and what made you so motivated to do that switch?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start with the motivation. I remember I was teaching a 3D modeling class to my students, and I just got really into the project where I basically what I did was I gave them a problem that they had to solve. And then I told them, all right, I need you to research this problem. They had to build a prototype. They had to test the prototype. The cool thing was they could 3D print the prototype at the school. And then, test, iterate, rinse and repeat. And I loved it. I loved the problem solving aspect of it. And so I just remember thinking I have to do something that incorporates this into my day to day. I was just in love with it. So did some research and I found user experience design, and I was like, all right, this is something I definitely should look into doing. So yeah, I spent probably about the first 2 years trying to break in. I mean, you can ask just about any professional in UX. Starting out is hard. It's
Mm.
really tough to break, especially during times when you have a pandemic, which is when I started, and then when you have our current job market right now is a bit rough. So basically trying to figure out, you know, how can I break in when I don't have the experience? And so I would take up these freelance projects basically to build up my portfolio, build up my skill set. And then after a while, I was listening to a podcast by a career coach that I was following, and she was interviewing a gentleman by the name of Larry Cornett. And Larry Cornett hosts, he's a career coach who hosts a community for a lot of tech professionals. And I decided to join that design community, and I met a lot of great people in there. One of which was my mentor. And then after a while, my mentor became my boss. And that's how I got my first full-time position in design.
That's a really beautiful story. You thought about what was rewarding for you, what was fun, what was interesting, how can I make more a part of my day, to what will kind of incorporate all of that experience and going about freelancing, just taking on new opportunities for yourself, and then being able to join a community. Um, how did you know to go in those steps of like, I just gotta do it, I gotta learn more about it, I gotta be a part of a community?
Yeah, so originally, I did my research when I tried to break in, and was cold applying to positions, but I was getting nowhere. I mean, I couldn't. I lost track of how many rejection emails and how many times I was ghosted by recruiters. So obviously, what I was doing wasn't working. And so it's kind of similar to my experience teaching. It's like I'm missing something here. So I joined a community, and I wanted to basically learn from someone who was smarter than me, and who had more experience. Like, what part am I missing? And that was the thing I really respected about my mentor was he he gutted my portfolio and my resume, and I mean that in a good way, but he was just brutally honest, like, this is just not working. And so having that was instrumental in getting over there, but also just building those relationships I found out were just valuable. Like, don't ever underestimate the value of your connections, your relationships, your network.
Yeah, I had a quick question on that actually. Especially considering that we, had the pandemic and relationship has been a big issue for some people, or socializing or connecting with people, things like that. You were in the pandemic while you were doing all this. You found connections, you found people, and people found you in a way, right? Because they didn't just hide away and did something else. They were like, no, we gotta like share our experience and help each other. Um, how have you grown since your connection with people in, because you said before, I remember there you said that like when you were in the corporate setting, sometimes it just becomes so jaded, right? You're just like, I'm just doing my job. There's no real relationship in this aspect. But now you're in a community and you're finding that interaction so valuable. How have you kind of transformed either your mindset and your personality? I don't know, like what has come out of those experiences for you?
I mean, for me, the biggest is just how much I was able to learn in a short amount of time, much faster than I would have on my own. Because you're learning from other people's mistakes, other people's experiences, and you're taking advice from someone who's been there, done that. Who's basically done what you're trying to do right now. So I was able to upskill much more, much quicker than I would have if I didn't. But also it also makes you challenge, some assumptions you might have. There have been a number of times when I would be talking to a mentor, a coach, or just another, a colleague, and you might hear a different perspective that, kind of challenges what you had in mind before, which in design is great. You always want to be challenging your assumptions. So those are probably the two biggest, well, just having the relationship in general, having that network of solid people also is great as well. So yeah, those are probably the big three benefits of just having a solid network.
Definitely. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. Certainly throughout the experience of trying to get your resume and portfolio up to the time when you're building your network and relationship with people, and then eventually hopping into the career the first 2 years and trying to figure it out. Did you feel imposter syndrome? And if so, how strong was it? And what did you do about it?
Yeah, I was very familiar with imposter syndrome. I'd say I probably had it at every single career change to one degree or another. It was never as bad as when I went into product design. I'd say that was probably when it was the loudest. And that's because, imposter syndrome is your belief that you don't belong there. And so I was making the mistake that I wanted everyone to view me as an expert. So what I didn't realize though when I was doing that was I wasn't asking questions because I didn't want to appear to be, a newbie. But I remember leaving some meetings where, there'd be a lot of jargon thrown around, technical terms, acronyms you didn't understand, and then you'd leave the meeting. It's like I have no idea what we were even talking about in there. So yeah, after a while, I just I dropped the act pretty much. I quit trying to pretend I was the expert. I started asking, just those drilling questions. What's the logic behind this? What does this mean? Could you clarify this, etc. Even asking the dumb questions that turns out that they're not as dumb as you might think. Because I found out like a lot of people were having the same questions, they just didn't want to ask. And so doing that really helped turn down the volume on imposter syndrome I had. Another thing though was just monitoring basically my mindset because again, imposter syndrome is your own belief. So I was basically trying to train how I thought, like, instead of saying, oh, we don't want to be found out that we don't belong here, it's like, no, we do belong here, here's why. And so I mean, honestly, unless you're a sociopath, you experience imposter syndrome to some degree or another. You just got to lower the volume.
Yeah. Dive a little deeper into that "you belong here" message. Do you tell yourself that? Like, how do you go about showing yourself you belong here?
What helped me was basically I keep a record of really any interactions I have in my career. So like how do my one-on-ones go? What did we talk about? What's some feedback I got in reviews, but also I track like what are my accomplishments? What are some things that I did to kind of, stand out? And then after a while looking back on that list, just showing like how far you've come in just that short period of time has helped me, kind of retrain myself to think, okay, yeah, I belong here, sort of thing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Did it take you a long time to kind of get there, or were you able to transition pretty quickly
Uh,
into?
no, it took a while. I mean, it's kind of like going to the gym, you got to put in a lot of repetitions to build muscles. This was kind of a similar scenario. I had to just keep doing it until I got into that routine. Then it became common.
Yeah, that's great. Um, I think you've already talked about a little bit about your ego, but can you tell maybe a specific moment in time where you had to set aside your ego, ask for help or clarification, and what helped you learn from that experience?
Yeah, so surprise, surprise, probably my best story was from teaching. So I was teaching 3D modeling to my 8th graders one day, and I was super excited because we were using software. I was teaching them how to use software that I used in college, and I thought I was pretty good with the software. So after several hours of getting the lesson ready, and I'm delivering the lesson the entire time thinking, oh, I'm just crushing this. At the end of the lesson, I remember I had a student raise his hand. He said, "Mr. Schutt, I didn't understand any of that." And it was a real gut punch, and it wasn't just him, it was pretty much the whole class. They had no idea what I was talking about, and so I was like, that's alarming. So I was asking them, it was like, what were the things that were tripping you up? And I found out, like, I was trying to teach them how to make a 3D design in a vector-based program, but meanwhile they didn't even know a vector was. Like I just skipped like all the foundational stuff. I just assumed it was like common sense. And looking back on it, it was completely ego driven. I was just, I prepped the lesson around, how I want to, show these kids how intelligent I am and how knowledgeable I am on this subject versus how are they going to intercept my lesson? How are they going to be able to digest it? How are they going to be able to basically learn from this lesson and be able to apply it? So that was a very humbling experience. And then once I kind of had that answer, I went to a colleague of mine and I said, "Hey, can you help me out with this? I got to break up this lesson because I just skipped a ton of steps." So that's that's my favorite.
Wow.
That's my favorite experience.
You will never forget it, and it's something that you can continue to be like, oh, well, don't be egotistic. And no
Right?
matter what age or what period you're in, and you always go back to that one story. Maybe that one student is gonna be like that person who just will break barriers because he's asking those questions. And in a way, I felt like you learned from him too by
Oh,
asking the right questions. Yeah.
I did. I completely respect it. It just flat out called me out on it. No, I loved it, but yeah, that was a very humbling experience to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah, for sure. Have you gone into experiences where you're working as a product designer and you had to ask for those clarification questions? How would you go about that in a way that doesn't maybe make people feel like, oh, I have no idea what's going on, like what's happening?
Oh yeah, that happens all the time, especially when you kind of get like design reviews where the feedback you get's pretty like vague, I think this or I feel this and then that's it. What's helped with me is that's definitely the time to ask those deep diving questions, but be be aware of how you're framing it. So I usually frame it along the lines of, "Hey, can you help me understand this?" Or "I'm a little unclear on this. What's the purpose behind this?" Rather than just say, "Why are we doing this?" Because some people can misinterpret that as, you accusing them of not doing their job. Whereas framing it more like, "Hey, I need some clarity on this because I'm not quite understanding what this is. What's the logic behind this?"
Yeah, so instead of like why you, meaning person must buy, put it back on yourself and saying in a very introspective way, like, I really don't know what's happening, but not like you're trying to intentionally make me feel that way, but like, I would love for us to get to a place where I can understand it because I really want to learn, right? So it's like having that humble moment, telling people how you're feeling or what's going on, and then they can then reach you where you're at.
Absolutely.
Um, you've already touched upon this actually, growth mindset. What are some strategies for you that you've developed or maybe have seen that works that you continue to use as a designer?
That's a good question. Honestly, kind of really the way I maintain sort of that mindset is I'm just constantly putting myself in new and uncomfortable situations because like I said, that's where the growth happens. That's where you learn the most. So whether it's facilitating workshops or whatever task you haven't done before, I'm usually volunteering for that, and that just kind of it kicks you out of your comfort zone. um yeah, that's as far as like techniques and stuff like that, that's really it. That's really all I do.
Yeah, no, that's a great mindset to have of like if you know you are feeling comfortable, get out of your way, do something different, and experience that feeling of being uncomfortable. So now you're learning, you're growing, and reflecting upon that. So you continue to go through this, I guess, iterative process of becoming the version that you want to be. And I guess I'm wondering to myself, do you think that there's a part of you, an intuitive part of you that says, I can do better than that? Like, do you ask yourself those questions or like any other kind of questions to help you to define that maybe this is not where you want to be and this is where you want to be kind of thing? Like, how do you kind of like help yourself?
All the time, and it can get to be pretty maddening at times. Yeah, there's always that gut reaction to something, whether you like it or not. I mean, I had that about my prior careers. Like my gut was just telling me like, dude, this is not for us. That's when the self-reflection happens. Why do I feel this way? Why does this instance make me uncomfortable? Why do I think Why do I assume this? You're just constantly asking yourself questions and basically challenging your own assumptions in that way.
That's wonderful. I love that you said that. I think it's learning to trust yourself, learning to hear yourself, and then from there make the decisions instead of always worrying about what other people think or how they want to go about things. Talk to me about a time when you use your soft skills to stand out as a designer and maybe any impact that has made on your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough to narrow it down because it's really a day-to-day thing. You know, I guess one is working in the corporate environment for a while. I've noticed that it's easy for me to kind of speak the language of stakeholders because I've worked to in a similar position where, what's the business objective, what's going to drive the return on investment sort of thing. So being able to tie your design decisions to that has been beneficial. Another thing is like after teaching teenagers and working in insurance for 7 years, like you really can't hurt my feelings. I love to take feedback actually. I actually seek it out, because that's how you grow. That's how you spot where are you missing the mark, what needs to be, improved. And that's what I respected about my mentor. Um I guess another one would be like in the case of like how do I present my work? Because in design, you're always presenting your work to stakeholders, executives, whoever, and just being aware of, who is your audience, but also, when you teach and you give a presentation, you've got like a couple minutes before they start tuning you out just instinctively. So being able to drive a point in a concise manner, in a way that's clear, free from jargon, marketing buzz, etc., has really helped too. And I guess one example in my work, I created a template because I was just sick of using PowerPoint. But I created a template to kind of present my decisions, and then that way I could use animations basically to back up. So basically, I could use like animations to control like what are they going to look at while I'm delivering it, but also just to make the point clear, concise, kind of frame the user story in a way that made sense. And the executive leadership loved it. So yeah, that's something that they want to start implementing more in the future. So I guess that's one example of how that's impacted my work.
That's awesome. So what I'm hearing is you didn't just learn soft skills while being a product designer. You took some of those soft skills that you had previously in other spaces from when you worked as I think you said in a corporate setting, insurance, right? And to teaching and presenting and talking with people, standing in front of people. And then now using all those experiences and cultivating something new creatively into a presentation that will be catered to the audience that you're working with, for example. Can you maybe help identify as like an advice or maybe a suggestions for people who don't feel so comfortable or confident that what they are going through right now in their career could be even applied to being a designer or product design work? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that sort of scenario. Like if you're coming from like the traditional background or sort of a graphics design background, it's a bit easier because there's a lot of similarities. But when you're coming from a different career, like in my case, teaching, um, a lot of hiring managers are not going to be able to connect the dots. How your previous skills and experience are going to translate to your new role. And so you really have to spell it out for them. And this is one thing I struggled with when I first started was being able to tell my story in a way that connected those dots. How are my skills going to impact my designs, drive business outcomes, etc., solve user needs or user problems. So yeah,
Yeah,
being able to connect those dots through storytelling has been a real game changer.
yeah, I love what you said actually. That instead of taking it personally, the rejection or people not really understanding what your resume is about, it's more of like thinking from the other person's perspective. They need your help to tell the story of how your soft skills or your previous work is actually very, very related to what they're trying to do. And once you could tell that story, it's like bingo. You probably are the right person for us because you can leverage your creative side and your technical side in a way that we really needed. We just didn't know about it because you just all you need to do is tell a story. That's a really great way of saying that. Can you tell me or describe a time when you had to adapt on the fly and think creatively to solve a problem in your work?
Yeah, so there was one project that springs to mind, and it was one of the first projects I had when I was first breaking into design, and I was working in a freelance capacity. Basically, what I was doing is I was trying to create an all-in-one platform for an insurance carrier that I was working with. Essentially, so adjusters could go on site and they could basically do all their job at once. They could take pictures of the damages, write the reports, write an estimate, issue payment to the customer. But due to tech constraints, some of the applications only worked on like a tablet or phone, some only worked on a desktop, so they'd have to go home to like finish up and issue payment. And the longer that's open, it costs the company money. So we created a product that they can do all of that at once. But one hurdle we didn't really predict was in regards to something that's called additional living expenses. And essentially, what additional living expenses are, say, for example, your house burns to the ground and you need some place to stay while repairs are being made. Additional living expenses pays for that. And usually that's through a third party vendor. So what they'll do is they'll put the family in a hotel. The insurance company will pay that vendor to house the customers. And then once their hotel stay is coming to a close, they'll send out this email to the adjuster saying, hey, should we extend this or not? And if they click yes, $5,000 gets issued to the vendor immediately and it extends their stay. It's supposed to be pretty quick and painless. What we didn't predict was in 2010, there was a lot of cyber attacks on a lot of the big insurance carriers. And so a lot of these carriers, including the one I was working with, issued a malware scanner that would intercept these emails, click all the buttons, and then if there was no malware, it'd send it to the adjuster. But in doing so, every single request was approved. So every request I went in cost the company $5,000. So there was a bit of urgency on that one because that adds up fast. So what we did is we had to basically create this kind of like a password protected page before you even get to the click yes or no option. So scanner would click on all the buttons on that password page, send it to the adjuster, they put in their password, and then they can extend it or not. Basically we had to add an extra step, but yeah, that was one where it got pretty intense pretty quick. That was one where we had to just drop everything and solve the problem.
Yeah, that sounds like a big deal, and that could have been very stressful on a lot of people, but it seems like you handle it really well. So if there were any lessons that you wish you had learned earlier in your career, how would you apply them today?
Ooh, asking questions. I wish I didn't wait so long to drop the expert persona. Just asking those questions up front. Storytelling's another one. I wish I picked up on that earlier, just because, again, trying to connect those dots, but also, delivering more effective design decisions to stakeholders. Stories just resonate with people more than explanations. Telling like how your design's going to solve, you know, our user's problem is a lot more effective than, well, we put this component here to do this. Yeah, I'd say those are probably the two lessons I wish I picked up early on.
Yeah, those are great points, actually. Would you say that you're living a pretty balanced life now? Or if not, how do you work on balancing your personal life with your professional pursuits and any strategies to avoid burnout?
Some days are better than others. I have to admit, I'm not always the greatest at this. In fact, when I remember when I first started in design, I was hanging out with some colleagues and they asked me like, "What are your hobbies?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't think I have any." It was a really depressing realization. So yeah, what I did was I had to kind of schedule, like, this is embarrassing to say, but I had to schedule time to basically go have fun and do my
Yeah,
hobbies,
no, it's
to
good.
take a
Yeah.
break from, either from work or, whatever I was working on. And then it just kind of became routine. So that's what I don't need that anymore. But it's just I always sketch out or etch out some time to work on you pretty much. And, weekends are a period where I strictly do not do any kind of work. So that way you're more fresh going into the week. Another thing kind of related to that was just, I noticed there were times when even when I wasn't at work, I was still at work because I was thinking about it. So my office and my living quarters were the same. And so what I kind of would do to kind of get myself out of that is I dress up even if I wasn't on camera or wasn't going to meet anyone, I just dress up whenever I was working on a project or something. And then once the hours were over, I move into my street clothes. And I kind of was training myself to think, okay, we don't need to think about work anymore. So that's kind of how I do it now. So
That's yeah, no, I don't think I've heard people say it that way, but that makes a lot of sense actually, where our physical, even if you're working remotely, our physical appearance sometimes tell us like, are we still at work or we're not? That's a good point. I hope people are using some of these strategies to help them feel better and taking initiative to block their calendar, do things that are fun, or spend time with people they haven't talked to, things like that. It's a really great thing to have when you can balance your social, emotional, and like even maybe take time to reflect or however you need. Can you tell us maybe the advice you have for someone to leverage their unique experiences and stand out in the field?
yeah, the big one is networking, build those relationships. But also just, take a honest look at yourself, kind of do a self-evaluation and take, what were your strengths and accomplishments in your prior role? What are some of the skill sets you're bringing? And then how does that translate over into the career you're pursuing? I've had some people who are coming from the teaching profession are like, well, do I have any skills that translate? I was like, oh my gosh, you got a ton of them. And it might not be the ones you think of, because I think when people think of what skills are applicable, they think of like, okay, oh, I don't know how to use, Figma or something like that. No, but those are just the hard skills. You got to organize your work. In teacher's case, your presenting skills should be pretty decent because you're presenting every day as a teacher. A lot of what you do as a designer is you're presenting your design decisions, defending your design decisions. So just be honest with yourself. What are your strengths and what are the skills you're bringing here, and then connect the dots and really spell it out for people. This is what I bring, and this is what sets me apart from everyone else in the design industry.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing besides networking is also speaking up, tell people, because people won't really know unless you are the one advocating for yourself and sharing what you are good at and being confident in it. So that believing in yourself is really, really, really important. So final question for you, Chris. Who or what inspires you either today, yesterday, tomorrow? What are you looking at?
Oh, that's a good one. Honestly, I think what inspires me is listening to other people's stories. That's like my favorite question to ask people is, what's your story? What got you from point A to point B? And just seeing like what you've accomplished in that amount of time, what you've learned. That's what I kind of find inspiring is, you'll have someone who comes from a completely different career and they're taking their skill set and they're killing it in their current career. I don't know. That stuff really resonates with me. I love hearing those stories.
And ironically, you are inspiring as well because you are sharing your story. And thank you for being on this podcast and for revealing who you are, what you do, how you think, and how you have evolved as a human being. So thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Where can people find you?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. Yeah, I don't really use Twitter, so yeah, LinkedIn's probably your best bet.
And what kind of people are you looking to kind of work with?
Really, any career changers, I'm glad to talk to them. People in tech in general, whether that's other designers, product managers, developers, and anyone who's I'm always fond of talking to people who are within the education realm or in the mental health realms. Those are the four types of people I usually talk to quite a bit. But I mean, anyone who needs advice or just wants to share stories, I'm totally open to it.
Beautiful. make sure you contact Chris. He's your guy for any mentorship or any advice, or just in general, if you're just looking to learn more. He is a great person to talk to. So thank you, Chris.
Oh, shucks. Thank you.
If this is the kind of episode that you like, along with anything that was inspirational for you, go ahead and give it a like, along with some comments and feedback down in the comments below. Subscribe to this channel so that you can hear and learn more. Talk to you soon.